The San Francisco Deltas will forever be etched in the record book as the last champion of the second incarnation of the North American Soccer League. We can only hope that they're the last ever NASL champion too, but you never know how that goes. Their appearance in the Soccer Bowl was certainly surprising. Not much was expected from this expansion team that was checking into the NASL as just about everyone else was checking out. Out of the dying embers of the NASL emerged a soccer Icarus who flew high, won it all, and then sank to the bottom of the sea due to a combination of cluelessness and Silicon Valley hubris. They were a team that could have given San Francisco a true alternative to the San Jose Earthquakes, a team for San Francisco proper. Instead, fans got a dumbass name and a stupid logo that adorns a championship banner that has nowhere to hang and may not actually exist. I am Cheyenne Hollis, this is The Touchback, and today we have the story of the San Francisco Deltas, Northern California's most mercurial soccer club.
Today is a historic day of a long future for the San Francisco Deltas.
The story of the San Francisco Deltas begins on October 14th, 2015, when a group of second-rate Silicon Valley founders and entrepreneurs gathered enough signatures to land themselves an expansion NASL franchise. Those signatures probably ended up being a moot point as the league was starting to suffer from severe decline. Raul wrapped up his spell at the New York Cosmos, and with him went any semblance of stability or structure. Earlier in 2015, Minnesota United had announced it was leaving the USL and joining the MLS starting in 2017. It was also around this time that the NASL began threatening the United States Soccer Federation in an attempt to become a Division I soccer league on par with MLS. That was laughable considering the NASL had never even met the criteria to be a Division II caliber league. In fact, the NASL had routinely been granted special waivers by US Soccer in order to keep that Division II status. Those efforts to become a Division I league ultimately went nowhere, but things were getting much worse for the league. At the conclusion of the 2016 season, Minnesota United had wrapped up its commitments and were gone. Two other sides had left for the USL and two more folded, meaning the NASL had only 7 teams heading into 2017. That meant the San Francisco franchise would be a much welcome arrival to the league, whether they had those signatures for an expansion franchise or not. By the way, those folks in San Francisco were just about the only ones with any interest in joining the NASL at this point in time. It's almost as if that ownership group and the CEO of the San Francisco club did like zero homework on where the NASL was heading. They had some conversations with the league hierarchy and said, hey, these folks sound friendly, let's join their league. Let's talk about those other owners and the face of the franchise, CEO Brian Andres Helmick. He linked up with venture capitalist and Brazilian Olympic skier, bet you didn't know that was a thing, Fabio Eagle. Together, they sought out to recruit all types of other investors for their NASL club in San Francisco. They found 17 other people, all woefully underqualified and wildly inequipped to run a soccer team, to join their ownership group. That, by the way, is not me just editorializing. Here are Helmick's 4 criteria to become an investor in the San Francisco NASL team. Number 1, I have to truly know them. Number 2, they have to be smart and able to add value to the project. Number 3, they have to have an affinity for sports and ideally love soccer. Number 4, most importantly, they need to be nice. So basically, he wanted a bunch of his long-term friends to give him money so he could run a soccer club, and like, hopefully maybe they liked soccer too. There is one thing I want to point out here. I have worked with and for tech startups of all kinds over the years, and when I hear stupid shit like this, it tells me that the startup has no idea what it's doing, and it's more concerned with irrelevant details than actually putting out a successful product. That is actually quite apt as it relates to the soccer team they were launching. No one really knew how to create a viable entity. Sure, they could launch something, they could get a prototype up and running, but none of these Silicon Valley fools had ever been forced to see something through to the end to get something to viability. It's the mid-2010s we're talking about, and big companies are scooping up startups for huge sums of money, mostly because their founders talk a big game. No one was really bothering to do any research on if what these founders were saying held up. A great example of that as it relates to this story can be found on the team's entire premise of existence as sold by Helmick, that San Francisco needed a soccer club. Sounds great if you know nothing about the local soccer scene. However, San Francisco already had itself a soccer team, San Francisco City Football Club. It was a supporter-owned franchise with some pretty notable minority investors involved as well. It played in the USL's Premier Development League, the precursor to USL Division II, and it wasn't just SFCFC. There were other teams around the Bay this time as well. There was this assumption from the ownership group and Helmick that somehow a team in the NASL was better, was superior, was a market improvement over all the other clubs that existed in San Francisco. It was classic tech startup hubris. We're doing something different, and that immediately means it's better. Why hand someone a credit or debit card when you can grab your phone, unlock your phone, open an app, tap on the UI, enter a passcode or scan your face, scan a QR code, tap confirm, and finally pay? Yes, the simple convenience of spending more time to complete a transaction today than ever before. Superfluous technology, you gots to love it. With that mindset in place, the franchise's first steps were finding a place to play in San Francisco and picking a name and logo. Let's start with the former. They would pick Kezar Stadium as their home ground. Now, it's not necessarily the best place to watch a soccer game or any sporting event these days because of the running track around it. Ownership and Helmick thought there was this connection to the facility because of the San Francisco 49ers history there. Maybe that was correct, maybe that was wrong. I'm not going to criticize it out of hand. There were other options in the city. Boxer Stadium or Cox Stadium probably made a little more sense for that first season. For those running the team, the 10,000 seats at Kezar Stadium were too good to turn down. If that was an acceptable decision, then the name and logo of the NASL team, well, it was 10 shades of god awful. They would be known as the San Francisco Deltas. Helmick insisted the name Delta meant change, but that is something only people super into math would understand. He also made some peculiar connections to the Greek letter delta, which is a triangle sharing similar iconography with San Francisco buildings and soccer. It's an isosceles triangle, come on. Look, a sports team name and logo should be easily understandable, and Delta's was anything but. It turns out there was a reason why the team had such a terrible name and logo. In a Reddit Ask Me Anything session, Helmick would reveal that the club had, I kid you not, 7 rules in place for coming up with this identity. Here they are. Number 1, no animal names. Number 2, don't copy European soccer names. Number 3, make sure non-native English speakers can pronounce the team name. Number 4, don't make it complicated. Number 5, don't be afraid to take risks. Number 6, don't manufacture history. Number 7, don't over-explain things. This is such an absurd list of rules to follow for picking a professional sports team name. Also, the name they chose breaks several of these rules they set upon. I don't get it. And unsurprisingly, they picked that crappy isosceles triangle logo to go with it. Helmick, by the way, was super proud that the S also contains a D, as if this was some major achievement in design. He also went on to type out this comment in that Reddit AMA, which is just the biggest cop-out imaginable as it related to the name and logo. We focus so much on branding and marketing that sometimes I wonder if half of America's soccer fans have forgotten that what we really enjoy is each other's company in the stands and watching a beautiful game. The irony of that statement, of course, is that he really wants fans to go out and buy merch with the team name and logo on it. For him to dismiss branding and marketing just feels absurd. It's actually a great example of how it just feels that Helmick is not tethered to reality in any way, shape, or form. There's just such a lack of real-world experience Helmick displays, and you'll see that as we progress in this story. Elsewhere, the San Francisco Deltas would take steps towards building their team. They hired Mark Dos Santos as head coach in what was a bit of a coup for them. He had previously won NASL Coach of the Year. Early on in Dos Santos' career, he'd spent time in the orbit of Jose Mourinho at Porto and Chelsea. This was a huge hire for the club, and quite frankly, it was probably the best decision they made in its entire existence. Toward the end of 2016, work began on finding players. The club held tryouts, they reached out to others playing in America and further afield. The main obstacle the Deltas faced here was that everyone knew the NASL was in a bad spot. It was losing money. That fight with US Soccer did no one any favors. In fact, the schedule release would be delayed, and there was a cloud of uncertainty hanging over the entire league heading into 2017. Despite this, a roster was built and the first Deltas team was finalized. There's one thing I want to give the ownership and Helmet credit for in particular. They did a great job of looking after players. In fact, one of the most significant achievements was providing housing for the players. That's obviously a big thing in San Francisco where rents are really expensive, and that was covered by the franchise. Alternatively, fan outreach efforts were all over the shop. They kept banging the drum on and on about one fan at a time, how they wanted to shake hands, kiss babies, and just reach out one fan at a time. That was confusing. Also confusing was the fact the team was trying to recruit people way too far in advance. They were doing this outreach 9-10 months before the Deltas would ever play a game. The disconnect and the confusion this caused has to be highlighted here. While they probably made a few diehard fans from these efforts, it just confused most folks. Can you imagine someone approaching you about a new professional sports team starting play in your city, and then you ask them, oh cool, when's the next game? And they say 10 months from now. It's just utterly ridiculous. You're not going to know what the hell's going on. Eventually, everything came into place. The Deltas filled out their playing squad, and it featured a lot of players either from Canada or ones who had played there professionally in the past. Additionally, the NASL had cobbled things together to get a season up and running. All that was left to do was play some games. The Delta's most high-profile preseason match was a closed-door friendly at the San Jose Earthquakes, which they won. It was finally time to kick off for real, and the San Francisco Deltas hosted Indy 11 at home for their inaugural match. If I would describe this in one word, it would be disappointing. A crowd of 4,133 showed up on a chilly San Francisco evening, far less than the potential 10,000 capacity of Kezar Stadium. The product itself on display was just not very exciting. The NASL was a slow, plodding version of soccer. Kyle Becker would score the first goal in club history, but a second half equalizer from Indy 11 saw the teams share the points in Game 1 for the Deltas. The team was back at Kezar Stadium for its second game 2 weeks later, although fans did not return. Only 1,700 and change showed up for the first win in Delta's history as they beat North Carolina FC. It turns out one fan at a time just didn't resonate with anyone involved. There was probably, though, a bigger issue at play. Those running the Deltas seemed hell-bent on creating tech solutions for problems that didn't exist with the soccer watching experience. At various times, they promoted AI ticketing and augmented reality during games as these cool new ways they were changing the soccer fan experience. I mean, they were doing this, of course, because that's the world they came from. The problem, AI ticketing never really got off the ground. Even the ideas behind it were stupid, like, do you want to sit next to a Barcelona or Real Madrid fan? Anyway, they were just using Eventbrite to sell tickets anyway. Augmented reality was even worse. It simply added a jumbotron to the screen of your phone as you were watching the game. But who the hell goes to a soccer game so they can hold up their phone to look through it so there's a jumbotron on their screen? To this day, the lack of critical thinking involved with launching some of those innovative solutions is absolutely astounding. What the hell were they thinking? But this lack of critical thinking, it also extended to on the pitch. Before a game in May, goalkeeper Romuald Pisser proposed to his girlfriend. Let me say that again. He proposed before the game. A game they would go on to lose because he got lobbed. Look, if you want to propose after a match, I'm fine with that. Go with it. Like, it's totally acceptable. But don't do it before the game. Here's the thing. I wouldn't even respond to my then girlfriend's text before indoor soccer intramurals at the University of Idaho. You, on the other hand, are a professional soccer player. This is your job. Where is your head at? And was there no one else around at the club to interject and say, hey, maybe that's just not the time and place you want to propose? On the pitch, though, aside from that hiccup, things were going relatively well for the Deltas. They even won a couple of US Open Cup games to set up another showdown on the road against the San Jose Earthquakes. They lost 2-0, but it was still a pretty big moment for the club. Then July hit. San Francisco suffered a humiliating 7-0 loss on the road to Miami FC. They would then follow that up with a 3-1 loss to those same opponents at home. If that wasn't bad enough, Helmick took to Medium to complain about the team's lackluster attendance, going as far as pinning the future of the franchise on them turning up for the second half of the season. The Deltas had routinely drawn less than 2,000 fans apart from the home opener and a game against the New York Cosmos. In the CEO's meandering Medium post, he just sounds so out of touch with reality. He sounds like someone who's been extremely sheltered for his entire life. First, he complained that no one in San Francisco knew who the Deltas were, but that was by his own design. He was the one who came up with the one fan at a time plan. He also said, branding and marketing don't matter for the club. Well, if you're not doing marketing outreach and you don't have strong branding in place, how the hell is anyone going to know about your club? Augmented reality jumbotrons? Second, Helmick goes off on how San Francisco has too many things to do. There were too many entertainment options in the city. But he was the one insisting that the city could support soccer at the time he launched the club. He's also the one who continually bragged about talking to so many people who thought professional soccer could work in San Francisco. So, like, who's to blame here? The fans or the person who said continually this would work? To that end, you would think some inward reflection would be needed by Helmick. Maybe ask, what is it you have done wrong? Instead, he begged some other Bay Area billionaires for investment and proceeded to do this.
Phil has recruited me and another guy. Now we are getting 3 people each. The more people that get involved, the more people who are investing, the more money we're all going to make.
No, I'm serious. That is a reenactment of what Helmick actually suggests everyone do in his Medium post to increase attendance at Delta's games. Here's the quote. If each of our 2,500 fans per game came back the next game and brought just one friend with him, we would have 5,000 in attendance. If those 5,000 do the same thing for the following game, we would sell out all 10,000 seats at Kezar Stadium. In short, we could sell out in a matter of 2 games if people just came back with one friend. That's a pyramid scheme. It's also a sign that the Delta CEO was way in over his head. It's also further proof that just about any bumbling moron in the 2010s could sell a startup to a big company, but let's not get wrapped up in that. I think the pyramid scheme pitch highlights just how disconnected Helmick was from fans and potential new fans. Just totally unrelatable to everyone. More importantly, a pyramid scheme is never ever the answer to anyone's problem. How Helmick could type out that paragraph and thought, you know what, this is the money-making idea. This is what's going to get it over the line beyond belief. And was there no one else working for the Deltas who could say, hey guy, maybe you want to take this down. It's not exactly the best idea. Hell, did no one bother asking him the question to say is like, hey, how is this not a pyramid scheme?
All right.
No, how is this not a pyramid scheme?
More worryingly than the pyramid scheme is the fact that Helmick continued to ignore the biggest obstacle, or one of the biggest obstacles preventing fans from going out to see the Deltas play: absurdly high ticket prices. The cheapest ticket to most Deltas game was $19. That is crazy money for a side with no presence or history trying to build up a fan base playing in a stadium with a running track. He'd always point to his fan survey saying price wasn't the issue, but I have zero interest in hearing about your tiny pool of very dirty data that you didn't likely clean up. Like, ticket prices were a problem here. Most people aren't dropping a $20 bill to watch a team they don't know play in a league they don't care about. It's just common sense. Attendance picked up somewhat slightly in the aftermath of Helmick embarrassing himself on media, but those two fans never invited two more fans who invited two more fans. That's really a shame, and it's a shame that the club refused to do anything resembling marketing to bring in new fans, because on the pitch, things were going really well. The Deltas had a hell of a run in the second half of the season that really deserved to be watched by soccer fans in San Francisco. They lost only once over the course of their next 15 matches and secured a spot in the 4-team NASL playoff, which is admittedly less impressive when you remember there were only 8 teams playing in it. Speaking of not impressive, the condition of the Kezar Stadium pitch was not particularly impressive as summer became fall and winter and high school football season began. The final game of the regular season saw a club record 4,755 fans show up to Kezar Stadium, although the video seems to point to butts in the seats being far less than that number. Either way, the Deltas still lost that home finale to the Jacksonville Armada 2-0. Didn't matter though, they were still playoff bound. For reasons I'll never fully understand, the NASL moved games for the playoffs from Saturday to Sunday. The Deltas, by large part, played most of their games in the 2017 season on Saturdays. There were a few midweek fixtures in there as well, but they'd only played one contest on a Sunday in the entire campaign. Sticking to Saturdays would have made sense come postseason time with the NFL in full swing, especially for the Delta since the 49ers had home games on both Sundays of the NASL playoffs. That didn't matter, and the Deltas pressed on. The semifinal saw them welcome North Carolina FC to Kezar Stadium. It was played on the same day as a Niners home contest. It's hard to know just how much this hampered the final attendance tally, but only 3,500 or so showed up for this playoff showdown. The Deltas did go on to win 1-0 thanks to a fairly stunning goal from Tyler Gibson. His stunning strike meant the Deltas were bound for the Soccer Bowl, where the New York Cosmos, the NASL's premier franchise, awaited. What was supposed to be a happy time for the league was one fraught with worry over the future. A few months earlier, U.S. Soccer had finally had enough of the NASL nonsense and told them to either meet Division II standards or go kick rocks. Apparently, those in U.S. Soccer were not all of that happy with the NASL challenging it over Division I status and decided to draw a line in the sand over the league's future. Several court challenges went nowhere, and no one knew if the NASL would be back for 2018 without that Division II status in hand. That didn't stop the league from adding what looked to be on the surface some dubious choices for expansion. Ownership groups in Southern California and San Diego were selected, but most other teams were worried about their future as is. Like, no one knew if the Deltas were going to be back. There were other teams in the same boat there, were just uncertain futures, and yet the NASL was out here awarding expansion franchises to a league no one thought was going to exist in a season. Focusing on the Deltas, the club had lost millions of dollars during its inaugural season, and at no point did Helmick or the club's investors seem to have any clue on how to run the business side of a soccer franchise. While they had hired the right people for coaching and recruiting and building a successful team on the pitch, that was not mirrored on the operational side of things, where no one seemed to know what the hell was going on or what they were doing. They were so committed to running the franchise like a startup. They kept saying this in all of the interviews. They were going to run this franchise like a startup. It was something that had never been done before in sports. They never actually took the time to stop and ask themselves, why hadn't any sports franchise been run like a startup previously? Just another example of the tech hubris on display throughout the San Francisco Deltas ownership and leadership teams. It was a further sign those in charge were just detached from the real world. These were people who fluked into money in Silicon Valley, and they somehow believed that fluke was a blueprint for success and not simply being in the right place at the right time. Ultimately, the Soccer Bowl between the Deltas and Cosmos serves as a tragic event. Nearly 10,000 people turned up to Kezar Stadium to watch the Deltas play in the championship game. The city had finally come out to support this team. They were rewarded with a victory for the ages. San Francisco strolled to victory. The club finally gained its recognition. It was a cool moment and one those in attendance that night will never forget. It would also be the last game ever for the San Francisco Deltas. Much rejoicing, much celebration happened in the aftermath of that victory. But during that celebration, a metaphor for just how poorly thought out everything had been was spotted when beIN Sports placed the Deltas logo, featuring silver, on top of a silver background, rendering it fairly unrecognizable. Come on, no stroke or a drop shadow, anything so the logo actually appears. It's sad and also not that surprising given everything playing out with both the Deltas and the NASL. An unrecognizable logo would be the least of anyone's concerns as reality soon set in. A few days after the Soccer Bowl, the club caused a stir when Delta's director of community relations, Ricardo Stanford Germel, wrote a goodbye email to staff that read suspiciously like the club was closing down. Club officials quickly refuted that claim. They kept saying, "We're not closing down, we're not shutting, we're still around, Delta's still here, blah, blah, blah." Around this time, though, in the world of the NASL, North Carolina FC had announced it was going back to the USL for the following season. The NASL was on life support and a path to survival looked even less likely. Then on November 24th, 2017, the Deltas confirmed they were folding, while Edmonton FC announced it was leaving the league. Why the club felt so strongly it needed to refute the rumor that it was closing down 6 days previously only to shut down, I don't get it. Speaking of things I don't get though, a day after that announcement was made about the Deltas folding, CEO Brian Andres Helmick took the weirdest victory lap on Medium. It was completely tone deaf, extolling the success of a team that had failed to bring in 2,000 fans for most home games, a product that was mostly of their own doing. Sure, on the pitch, the Deltas were successful. They were champions, but off the pitch, everything those running the club had done was a disaster. It did not work. At no point in time did the franchise have anything resembling a connection to San Francisco. And all that group could do is point fingers and make excuses as to why. Yet this post would have you believe Helmick, the front office, the investors had accomplished some triumph of the human spirit, that they had just done the unthinkable, that they had moved mountains and just accomplished something against all odds. In reality, they bought a soccer team and they folded it a year later. It just happened to win a championship in the process. There was also a bunch of crap in this post about how the Delta story could teach others and provide the framework for another soccer team in San Francisco, which again already existed before the Deltas arrived and was also owned by fans. Of course, it was not just the Deltas going under. The NASL would not return for the 2018 season or any season since. That is probably for the best, as the league did not have a path to any sort of viability and had been surpassed by the USL. The story of the San Francisco Deltas is proof there is more to running a sports franchise than simply showing up and thinking there's a gap in the market you can fill. It's also a story that shows that implying your stupid startup tech mindset to something that doesn't come from that world is a recipe for failure. There was no real plan or strategy in place to make the Delta successful. At best, their ideas were altruistic, and at worst, they were dangerously naive. I'm inclined to believe the latter, just given how much tech hubris can be seen throughout the existence of the San Francisco Deltas. The focus was on being a soccer startup. It had to be a startup. In one of his early interviews, the Deltas CEO puffed his chest out about how he was helping the league modernize by getting it to use Slack. What was the point? What did it accomplish? Nothing. All of the tech advancements ever promised by Delta's ownership and their CEO were totally unnecessary. They kept wanting to change the fan experience, talking about making things different, making things better, but they could never deliver on that promise. So much time and effort was wasted on fool's errand that those in charge forgot about the basics: branding, marketing, and creating a connection with the community, giving them a reason to come see your team play. Even then though, it seems like the Delta's Soccer Bowl victory really could have been a springboard, a foundation for future success. It basically fixed 18 months of missteps by crappy owners. Naturally, they decided to close up shop instead of building on that platform, the first good thing that had happened in franchise history. If there's one takeaway from the San Francisco Delta story, I believe it's this: don't name your team after trigonometry and expect people to rally behind it. Thank you for watching this video. To learn more about the most underrated moment in U.S. men's national team history, video upper right hand corner of your screen and lower right hand corner of your screen is the soccer underdog who was absolutely despised and became a champion anyway. Until next time, I am Cheyenne Hollis. This is The Touchback, and as always, hashtag take it out to the 25.